John Nord, and I'm going to show you a ring that I'm making today. It's a sterling silver setting, and it's made out of the inside pink part of a conch shell. And this is what the piece looks like. I can't call it a stone, but this is what the conch shell piece looks like that's been formed into like a teardrop stone. I bought these from a man in Albuquerque that makes these, and most of you have seen the inside of a conch shell where it's pink. Well, it makes a real pretty stone to set in a ring or something. And I wanted to show you step by step how I make this. It's going to have a beaded border, and there's a lot of soldering in this, and I hope that you enjoy it. Be sure you like and subscribe to my video channel. Thank you. Okay, we're going to make this band out of 14 gauge pattern silver. You can get this at the jeweler's supply. I've put my maker's mark on the back of it, and the length I cut came off of a ring chart. You can get these online. I cut it just a little bit longer than what it says I need. I take a propane torch and I heat it up to a dull red. This will anneal it so we can bend it easier with the ring bender. It don't take long to do this. Okay, we're going to go here to the bezel. The conch, I call it a stone, but it's the inside of a conch shell shaped like a stone. These are real pretty. They're pink usually, and they make a nice stone to set. I really like this, and these are real popular with my customers. I'm using a 3/16 serrated bezel. It's fine silver, and I just start bending it around the conch, and right up at the top is you know, that tight curve over the tip, so I bend that beforehand. I crease it, and then I put that around the stone, and then I try to join the bezel right towards the back on the side so it's not so obvious. You could join it at the top, but I've had a little trouble with it separating up there at the top, so I usually put it back here on the back side. Now I'm marking it, and I'm going to cut this bezel off, and that way I'll know I'll have the right length to solder together. And I just cut these with some pliers, some cutter pliers, and just cut it straight across so your two ends will come together good. And then you just kind of form it back into a circle to where the ends meet real tight. And it doesn't matter about the shape at this point. You still got, you know where the top is because it's creased. But anyway, the main thing is to get the bezel together, and that way you can solder it together easy. I use handy flux, and I flux this bezel up and get it on the inside and outside, and then I put it into my little gravel pit here with the tweezers on it, and I heat it up with just a mini torch. It doesn't take much heat for this, and I'm using 75% silver solder. You just heat her up until it gets a little bit of a dull red with this 75%, and your flux is clear. And add a little bit to the joint. You want to make sure the joint is completely closed and soldered. If you have too much solder there, you just take your orbital sander and just kind of smooth it down. Now I'm moving outside to my bender. This is a Pep Tools bender, and part number's there on the screen. It's easy to bend these rings with this tool. It's great. I pick a size. I'm building this ring a 6.5, and I pick a size that's real comparable to that inside of that sizer ring and a nylon bushing to fit the dowel. And I just put it in here and I start bending it and just form it around. And this makes easy work out of bending a band. You can do cathedral rings with this tool also. You don't have, cathedral ring doesn't come together at the top, and then as well as round bands like this. Now this is pretty close. It's a little bigger than the sizer ring, which I intended because I don't like to come up short. If you come up short, it's hard to add silver back to it. So I always make them a little bit longer. And then I cut them and trim them. I take my brass jaw pliers here and I get it straightened out real good. And then I will put it on a ring dowel. And the sizer ring, I put it on there first to see exactly where it goes down on that dowel, because it don't always match right up. And then I take some blue masking tape and I put it around the dowel right at the bottom of where the ring goes to. That way I know exactly where my band that I'm making should go down to on that ring dowel. When we got that set, then we're going to get the band and put on there and see what it looks like. And it, of course, is too big because I cut it a little bit big. So I take it over, I cut it off, and I reform it to come together. And I check the size, and it's exactly where the other one goes down on the dowel, so I know it's right. Now I'm going to solder it together. I flux it up with handy flux, and I put it in here and hold it, and then I'm going to solder it together with 65% silver solder. It don't take a lot of heat, but I do use my bigger torch because this is 14 gauge. And you heat it up until the flux is clear and the ring's just a little bit of a dull red, and you add the the solder. You want the solder to completely fill the joint. You don't want a little pit right there. Okay, after that I move back over to my bezel. I put it around the conch to make sure it fits about right, make sure it's not too tight, make sure it's not too loose, and just kind of reform it. And then I'm going to put it down on a piece of 22 gauge sheet sterling silver, and I'll flux both of these items up. And once I get it soldered down, well, that will be our setting after it's bordered and trimmed. I like this handy flux with the little brush because you can just take it out of the bottle and flux it right on. And handy flux always tells you when it's time to add the solder because it turns clear, and it kind of gives you a hint as to the temperature. Okay, I put this on a ceramic type plate, and I heat around the backing plate. I'm actually heating the ceramic up because that radiates up through that backing plate. You don't want to put this heat on that bezel. The bezel will melt right quick if you do. And so I go around the bezel on the backing plate, and as soon as that the flux turns clear and the backing plate gets a little bit red, I start adding my flux to this inside the setting. And I just draw, once I add it in one spot, I draw the flux around the bezel to make it even and fill all the gap. You want to make sure there's no daylight under that bezel. Now I'm going to put a 10 gauge beaded wire border around this ring. And this is kind of tedious. It's hard to get the beads just right and all, but what I'm doing is I'm going to bring them together at the top, because you can't make this beaded border make that sharp of turn. So I'm going to bring it together right here at the top. And what I had to actually do, the way it came together, I had to cut the two top beads in half. And then I joined them like one bead. And that worked real good. And I again flux it up. And then I put her down on the ceramic. And I solder this border together with my mini torch. This again is 75% silver solder, and it doesn't take a lot of heat. It gets red real quick. And just add a little solder, and I'm trying to make those two halves of a bead one bead, which is easy to do with the solder. Don't take much. Cool it off, put it in the acid, and put it around the setting. Then once I got that done, I flux it up again. I make sure the border's down flat on the setting. And I'm going to use 65% silver solder to solder this beaded wire down. Now when you're soldering the beaded wire, you want to concentrate your heat to the backing plate. If you're adding solder to the beaded wire and it starts climbing up on top of the beads, that means the beads are hotter than the backing plate. So you want to heat the backing plate up and keep it hot so the solder will go underneath the beads. And if you do have some solder climb up on top of the beads, just heat the backing plate up further and it'll usually come down off the beads and get on the backing plate. And you want the rope, the beaded rope border, you want it soldered down all the way around to the backing plate. No gaps, no loose spots. There we go. And of course, every time I solder, I usually put it in my acid solution and clean the flux off of it. Now I'm drilling a 1/16 inch hole in the top here. Excuse me. And I'm going to put my scroll saw down through there, and I'm going to start cutting around this beaded border. I try to cut pretty close to the beads and follow them in and out, because I think the ring looks better with kind of a jagged type edge. And you can see the little waves here on this piece I cut it out of, and see how I went in and out of it. It makes the beads look like they really stand out in their whole instead of half beads. Then I take a silicone wheel and I go around between the edges and the cut edge, and I make sure that cut edge is smooth. Now I'm going to sand a flat spot here on top of our band, right where it was joined together, and this is where I'm going to put the setting on it. I'm going to put that flat spot down on the back of the setting the way I want it, and then I'll solder that to the back of the setting. Kind of like this right here. Okay, we're going to flux them all up again. I'm not going to use the gravel pit, I call it. I'm not going to use it for this. I've got it set in there, but I moved it. I put the setting down. I used a magnetic clamp to hold that band. And then I take my little holder tool that I made, and I put it down on top of the band to put weight on it so it don't move around. And I just heat up both pieces until the flux is clear and I see it's the right color, and then I add the solder. You can solder it with 65% or the extra easy solder. It will hold. These holding clamps is just a U-bolt with a bolt welded to it, and it leans over and puts weight on it. And there's the soldered together ring. It looks good. It'll go in the acid to get cleaned up. Okay, now I'm using a silicone, I believe these are silicone polishing wheel. They're little bristle brushes. They come in different colors, I usually start with a blue, but I didn't need to here because this is polished up pretty nice. So I started with a pink, and I'm going inside the band, all around the band, in between the beads, and then I go to a tan, and then I finish up with a light green. And usually it's polished up real nice. I take some sawdust. I keep this in a little can, and I always put a little bit of sawdust under my stones to pat them up a little bit. If there's any rough spots or anything like that in the stone or the setting, this takes care of it. And I just take some tweezers and I set the small pieces of the sawdust down into the setting until the bottom's covered. And this kind of raises the stone up just a little bit. You can use this trick if you've got a shallow stone and a high bezel to raise that stone up and make it look better. Anyway, I get this all in here, and then I make sure there's no big pieces in there, and then I take the conch on a waxed dowel rod, I pick it up, and I set it down on this setting. And if you did your bezel right and got it all straightened up right, it'll go right down in there tight. That's a perfect fit. Okay, next I take a little burnisher and I start bending the bezel over. And it doesn't take much. And I bend it over all the way around the ring. And then once I get it all bent over, I go over it with my hand and make sure there's no sharp areas, because you don't want this snagging clothing and stuff like that, or hurting someone with a sharp point. Right up at the tip, there's always usually a sharpness to the tip up here, and you can kind of see it sticking up there some. And that's real pointed. I don't like that part. So I take a silicone wheel, a blue one, and I just polish on that tip point right there at the front. And that will kind of round it over. And once it's smooth, that's where I stop. I don't do it too much because you can make the bezel separate or disappear up there. But you can see it sticking up there. And then the silicone wheel, we'll just kind of round that over until it's smooth. And once that's done, well, we check it, make sure it's okay, and we're done with putting the conch into the ring. Looks pretty good, but we're not finished. We're going to take some Black Max by Midas, and I put a little bit on my brush. And this is a acidic that will tarnish the silver immediately. And I paint this around the beads, and I try to get it to go down in all the deep crevices. And then I will also paint the band of the ring because it has a pattern design on it, and it'll go down into the cracks of the pattern. And this is going to make all these beads and this pattern on the band stand out once you polish this off. So I get this done. Now, this is an acidic solution, and you don't want it to keep tarnishing real bad. So what I do after I do this is I dip my brush into baking soda solution, and then I take the baking soda and I paint it over the same areas, and that neutralizes any acidic tendencies of that solution. And then I just kind of dry it off good. And then I'm going to I have these little square polishing sponges that work real good, and I'm going to go over this ring real good, and this will take this tarnish off of the high parts and leave the tarnish down in the low parts. And I especially hit the bezel to make sure there's no tarnish up on the side of the bezel. And I also hit the inside of the band, and then I go around the band and it hits the highlighted spots on the band also. Once you get this done, this ring's pretty much done. You can see how it highlights everything.